right, so today we are really diving deep into this book called Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this one.
Have you read it?
I have, yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff, and it kind of turns the typical self-help thing on its head a little bit, because
Right.
usually we think of ego as something to be battled once you reach the top, right?
Right, like once you're already successful.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, now I'm super successful. I have to battle my ego. But he's saying no ego is something that's holding us back at every stage.
At every step of the way, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point because it's so easy to get caught up in our own hype.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially like in today's world with social media and everything.
It's like a breeding ground for ego.
Totally. And I think what I really liked about Holiday is he comes at this from this really interesting perspective because he's a student of stoicism.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, which if you don't know, stoicism is this ancient philosophy that's all about mastering your emotions.
Right, kind of being unfazed by the ups and downs of life.
Exactly, and making rational choices even when like everything's going crazy around you.
I could see how that would tie into keeping your ego in check.
Totally, because it's about focusing on what you can control, which is basically your own thoughts and your actions.
And not letting your ego dictate your decisions.
Exactly, and one of the stories that really stuck with me from the book was about William Tecumseh Sherman.
Oh, wow, from the Civil War.
Yeah, the war's hell guy.
Yeah,
So early in his career, he was actually offered a more powerful command, but he turned it down.
really.
Can you imagine that? Like being offered a promotion and saying, no thanks.
That's wild, especially for someone who's known for being like this ambitious military leader.
I know, right? It
Like,
seems so counterintuitive to how we think about success.
for sure. It's like he understood that sometimes playing the long game means taking a step back or maybe even a sideways step.
Yeah, and I think Holiday uses that story to illustrate how Sherman was more focused on mastering his craft than he was on chasing titles.
Which is so interesting when you think about it because most people would kill for that kind of promotion.
Right, but Sherman was playing a different game. It seems like he was more interested in learning and observing than he was in being the guy in charge.
It's like he knew that real success comes from that slow and steady ascent. Like really taking the time to learn and grow.
Yeah, it's that whole tortoise and the hare thing.
Totally. And I think that's such a powerful contrast to those flashy Napoleon types who come in like a wrecking ball but then fizzle out just as quickly.
Oh, totally. It's like they burn so bright, but so briefly.
Exactly. And then they're gone.
And what's left in their wake.
Right. It makes you think about all the emphasis we put on self-promotion these days, especially online.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It's like everyone's trying to be an influencer or a thought leader before they've even had time to like have an original thought.
It's so true. It's like we're all so busy building our brands that we forget to build a foundation.
Yeah. And then the whole thing crumbles.
Exactly. And Holiday actually uses this really interesting example in the book. He talks about this writer, Emily Gould, who got this huge book deal,
Nice.
right? But then she really struggled to actually write the book.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's like all that online hype, all that pressure to be this big thing. It kind of drained her energy before she could even begin.
Wow, that's a good point. It's like ego talking louder than action.
Yes.
And then the action never actually happens.
Exactly. And I think this quote that he shares from Kierkegaard really captures this perfectly.
Right. Okay. I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Okay, so he says, gossip anticipates real talk, and to express what is still in thought weakens action by forestalling it.
Whoa. Okay, I need a second to unpack that one.
Right, steep.
But it's like all that noise we create around our goals. The talking about it, the posting about it, it can actually drain our energy before we even start.
Yeah, it's like we're giving away our power to the hype.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then when it comes time to actually do the work, we're already exhausted.
Totally. So, okay, if focusing on the work instead of the hype is so key, what about when we need to work with others to achieve a goal?
Right. Because not everything is a solo mission.
Exactly. Like, how do we navigate ego in a collaborative setting?
That's a great question, and I think that's where this advice from John Boyd comes in.
Okay, who's John Boyd?
So he was like this legendary military strategist, and he once told someone he was mentoring to focus on doing rather than being.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like instead of trying to be the hero or the star, focus on contributing quietly behind the scenes.
Kind of like being the wind beneath the wings type of thing.
Exactly, and he actually uses this word antibulo, which I had never heard before, but it basically means clearing the path for others.
Antiambula. I'm going to need you to break that down for me.
Okay, so think of it like, have you ever gone out of your way to help a colleague shine, even if it meant less recognition for you?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so that's kind of the spirit of being an anti-belo. It's
Mm.
about putting the needs of the team or the project above your own ego.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. And it's funny because when you were describing it, I immediately thought of Bill Belichick.
Ooh, the Patriots coach.
Yeah, exactly. He's like the mastermind behind their dynasty, but he's also known for being incredibly detail-oriented and hands-on.
Right, like spending hours analyzing game film, which a lot of head coaches consider beneath them.
Yeah, but that's how he finds those little edges, those tiny advantages that add up to big wins.
So he's embracing that behind-the-scenes role to gain a deeper understanding of the game.
Exactly, and Holiday calls this finding canvases for others to paint on.
I love that.
Me too. It's like instead of trying to be the star of every show, you're creating opportunities for others to shine.
And in doing so, you're actually giving yourself more space to learn and grow.
That's such a good point because when we're so focused on being in the spotlight, we miss out on all those valuable lessons that happen in the shadows.
Totally. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, especially in today's world, where it's so easy to get caught up in the need for external validation.
Absolutely. And even when we are playing a support role, it's so easy to let a little pride creep in when things go well.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But then you have someone like Jackie Robinson.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
Talk about grace under pressure.
Seriously facing those horrific racist taunts when he integrated Major League Baseball, it's unbelievable.
I know, and he showed incredible restraint because he understood that his purpose was bigger than his ego.
It's like he was playing on a whole other level.
He really was, and I think that's such a powerful example of how our ego can either fuel our greatest triumphs or it can lead to our downfall.
And it's interesting because you see that same dynamic play out in other fields too, like with writers, for example.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Holiday talks about J.D. Salinger and John Fonte,
Okay.
both incredibly talented writers,
Mm-hmm.
but they let their egos sabotage their careers.
How so?
They couldn't handle criticism or the pressures of fame, and it really affected their work.
Wow, so they basically got in their own way.
Exactly. And then you have someone like General McClellan during the Civil War,
Oh.
brilliant on paper, but he became so paralyzed by overthinking and self-doubt that he couldn't make a decision.
Oh, no. So he was like a victim of his own analysis paralysis.
Pretty much. And Holiday argues that his ego was actually manifesting as this false confidence.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like he was so afraid of making a mistake that he ended up making the biggest mistake of all, which was doing nothing.
Wow, that's a good point. It's like sometimes our ego can masquerade as confidence when it's actually fear holding us back.
Exactly. And I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to because we all have that voice in our heads that tells us we're not good enough or that we're going to mess things up.
Totally. It's like we create these elaborate fantasies of success in our minds, but then we're too afraid to actually take action.
Because what if we fail, right?
Exactly. And then our ego takes over and starts telling us all these stories about why we shouldn't even bother trying.
It's like we're living in our heads instead of engaging with the present moment.
Yes. And Holiday uses this really interesting example of George C. Marshall.
Okay, another military leader.
Yeah. So during World War II, he refused to keep a diary
Really?
because he didn't want it to become a performance.
Wow.
Yeah, he understood the importance of staying present and focused on the task at hand, not on creating a narrative for posterity.
That's incredible. It
Yeah.
takes a lot of discipline to resist that urge to document everything for the Garragram.
It really does, and I think it speaks to his humility and his understanding that real leadership is about service, not self-aggrandizement.
Absolutely. It's about being present in the moment, not crafting a persona for the history books.
Exactly. And speaking of learning from the past, did we talk about Genghis Khan?
Are we going there?
Yeah, because when we think of Genghis Khan, we think of...
Ruthless talker.
Exactly, but he was also dedicated to constantly learning.
Really?
Yeah, he wasn't just a brute force. He actually studied and adopted the best technologies and tactics of his enemies.
Wow, so he was like a student of warfare.
Exactly. He knew that he could always learn something new, and that adaptability was key to his success.
That's fascinating because we often think of the Mongols as barbarians.
Yeah.
But their empire was built on this foundation of continuous learning and adaptation.
Exactly. And I think that's such an important lesson for us today, especially in the business world.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the companies that fail to innovate and adapt to changing market trends, they're the ones that get left behind.
It's like that old saying, evolve or die.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's so important to stay curious, to question our assumptions, and to always be open to new ideas, even when we've achieved a certain level of success.
Because success can be a trap in itself, right?
Totally. It's easy to rest on our laurels and think that we've got it all figured out.
And that's when the ego starts to creep back in.
Yeah, and we become blind to our own blind spots.
Exactly, and we stop learning and growing.
Which brings me to another great story from the book about Bill Walsh.
The 49ers coach.
Yeah, so he's the guy who turned them into Super Bowl champions, but he was incredibly humble about it. Oh, yeah. He recognized that his success wasn't just because of some grand plan.
Right.
It was a combination of hard work, good fortune, and being in the right place at the right time.
So he wasn't afraid to acknowledge the role of luck in his success.
Exactly. And I think that's so important because it's easy to buy into our own hype and start believing that we're somehow special or destined for greatness.
Right, and then we stop working as hard.
Exactly, and we become complacent.
And that's when we become vulnerable to what Holiday calls the expectation hangover.
Okay, the expectation hangover. Tell me more about that.
So it's like you achieve a big goal, you reach the summit, and then,
Yeah, what happens after the after party?
right, do we rest on our laurels or do we find a way to keep that momentum going?
Yeah, it's like that feeling of, okay, now what?
Exactly. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with because it's easy to lose motivation once we've achieved a certain level of success.
It's like we need a new goal, a new mountain to climb.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's so important to have a strong sense of purpose, something that drives us beyond external validation.
Yeah, something that gives our life meaning beyond just achieving the next big thing.
Exactly. And I think a great example of that is Katharine Graham.
Oh, wow, taking over the Washington Post.
Yeah, she inherited this huge responsibility after her husband's tragic death and had to navigate all these challenges, a hostile takeover attempt, a major strike at the paper.
It's amazing she didn't just throw in the towel.
Right. But she found this incredible inner strength to persevere. And I think it came from her deep sense of purpose, her commitment to the paper's legacy, not from her ego.
It's like she knew that the stakes were bigger than her own personal ambitions.
Exactly. And that gave her the courage to keep going even when things got really tough.
It's a powerful example of how finding meaning in our work, aligning our actions with a greater purpose can give us the resilience to navigate even the most difficult circumstances.
Absolutely. And I think it's something that we can all aspire to no matter what our field or our goals may be.
Totally. And on the flip side of that, you have someone like John DeLorean.
Oh, the car guy?
Yeah, whose ego amplified his failures.
What do you mean?
So his company was struggling, but instead of facing his mistakes head on, he got caught up in trying to save face.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he ended up getting involved in a drug trafficking scheme in a desperate attempt to save his company.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a crazy story, but it's a good reminder that sometimes our biggest setbacks can become our greatest teachers if we let them.
If we're open to learning from them.
Exactly, but DeLorean's ego wouldn't allow him to do that. He was so focused on preserving his image that he ended up making things even worse.
It's a classic example of how ego can blind us to the bigger picture.
Totally. And it reminds me of this quote from Malcolm X, who said, "Every defeat, every heartbreak, every loss contains its own seed, its own lesson on how to improve your performance the next time around."
I love that quote.
Yeah, me too. And I think it's so relevant to this idea of ego because it's about how we choose to respond to failure.
Right. Do we let it define us? Or do we use it as an opportunity for growth?
Exactly. And I think that's the key difference between someone like DeLorean and someone like Malcolm X.
So true. DeLorean let his ego drive him to make even riskier decisions, while Malcolm X used his time in prison for profound personal transformation.
Yeah, he immersed himself in books, he engaged in deep self-reflection, and he emerged a completely changed man.
It's incredible he turned what could have been dead time into a lifetime.
Exactly. And it's a powerful reminder that even in the face of adversity, we always have a choice.
A choice in how we respond.
Exactly. We can choose to let our circumstances define us, to become bitter and resentful, or we can choose to focus on what we can control: our mindset, our attitude, our actions.
And that reminds me of another really powerful story about enduring injustice with grace.
Okay, let's hear it.
Remember we were talking about Orson Welles?
Oh, yeah, Citizen Kane, one of my all-time favorites.
So when that film came out, William Randolph Hearst was convinced it was based on his life.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he was furious. He launched this massive campaign to discredit the film and prevent it from being released.
Wow, talk about an ego trip.
Right. But here's the thing. It totally backfired.
No way.
Oh, yeah. His actions actually amplified the film's success. Well, all the controversy and negative press just made people more curious to see it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Right? It's like he inadvertently created a huge marketing campaign for the film.
Wow, talk about snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
Exactly. And in the process, he ended up damaging his own reputation.
So his ego backfired spectacularly.
Big time. And I think that's a good reminder that sometimes the best way to disarm our enemies is to simply refuse to engage in their games.
It's like not letting them see you sweat.
Exactly. Because when we get caught up in reacting to every little slight or provocation, we give our power away.
And we end up playing their game instead of ours.
Exactly. And I think that's something that Frederick Douglass understood on a profound level.
Oh, yeah.
He famously said, "They cannot degrade Frederick Douglass. The soul that is within me, no man can degrade."
Such a powerful statement.
It really is. And I think it speaks to this idea that true self-worth comes from within, not from external validation.
So it's not about what other people think of us, but about how we see ourselves.
Exactly. And when we base our self-worth on external factors, we're giving other people the power to define us.
And that's a dangerous game to play.
It really is, because we're essentially handing over control of our own happiness and well-being.
So what's the alternative?
I think it starts with cultivating a strong sense of self-love and self-acceptance.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because when we truly love and accept ourselves' flaws and all-lineness, we're less likely to seek validation from others.
And we're less likely to be thrown off balance by criticism or negativity.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important foundation for managing our ego, because it allows us to approach challenges and setbacks with more grace and resilience.
It's like we're less fragile, less easily bruised by the ups and downs of life.
Exactly. And that frees us up to focus on what truly matters, which is living a life that's aligned with our values and making a positive impact on the world around us.
That's beautifully said. And you know what it makes me think about?
What's that?
So we were talking about how ego can lead us astray even when we think we have it all figured out.
It's so true, right?
Yeah.
It's like we can read something, we could even agree with it on an intellectual level.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to actually living it out.
Totally. It's like that old saying, easier said than done.
Exactly. And I think that's especially true when it comes to managing our ego, because it's so insidious, you know?
Oh, yeah, it sneaks up on you.
Exactly. Like you could think you have it under control and then bam, it rears its ugly head.
Totally. And Holiday actually tells this really funny story in the book about how he had read something about the dangers of fame and fortune.
Okay.
And he was like, yeah, I get it, you know?
Right, like I'm too smart for that trap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then years later, he's watching someone he really admires, this mentor of his, basically go down that same self-destructive path. Oh, no. And it just goes to show you that even when we think we're immune to ego's traps, we're not.
We're all human.
Totally. And I think that's why it's so important to have people in our lives who can call us out on our BS.
Oh, absolutely. Accountability is key.
Yeah, because sometimes we need that outside perspective to help us see what we're blind to.
Totally. It's like that saying, you can't read the label from inside the jar.
Exactly. And you know what else I was thinking about? Remember when we were talking about Bill Walsh and the 49ers?
Yeah.
So after they won their first Super Bowl, everyone was like, this is it. They're going to be unstoppable.
Right, like a dynasty in the making.
Exactly. But then the next 2 seasons, they totally underperformed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Holiday argues that it's because they started believing their own hype.
Oh, interesting. So they got complacent.
Exactly. It's like they
Right.
achieved that big goal and then they took their foot off the gas.
It's that expectation hangover we were talking about.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's such a common trap to fall into.
Oh, absolutely. We achieve something great, and then we think we can just coast.
Yeah. Or we get afraid to try anything new because what if we fail?
Right. It's like we become prisoners of our own success.
Totally. And I think that's why it's so important to have that beginner's mindset, to always be willing to learn and grow.
And to not be afraid to fail, because failure is just feedback.
Exactly. It's an opportunity to learn and get better.
And you know what else I think is important?
What's that?
Remembering that ambition is not a bad thing.
Right. It's what drives us to achieve great things.
Exactly. But it's about managing our ambition wisely,
Yeah.
making sure it's aligned with our values, and that it's not coming from a place of ego.
Yeah, because ego-driven ambition can be really destructive.
Oh, totally. It's like this insatiable hunger that can never be satisfied.
And it can lead us to make decisions that are not in our best interest.
Exactly. And I think Holiday uses a great example in the book about Winfield Scott.
Okay, who's that?
So he was this highly respected general, and he had this subordinate who was constantly bugging him about something really trivial.
Oh, no, I've totally been that person before.
Uh-huh. We all have.
Yeah.
But anyway, Scott finally had enough, and he said this really great line. He said, "Compassion is always due to an enraged imbecile who lays about him in blows which hurt only himself."
Wow. Okay, that's a mouthful.
I know, right? But isn't it perfect?
Yeah, actually it is.
It's like that perfectly sums up ego-driven ambition.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like we're so busy trying to prove ourselves that we end up hurting ourselves in the process.
Exactly. And we push away the people who care about us.
It's so true, and it makes me think about Napoleon.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
for all his military genius, the guy was kind of a jerk.
He wasn't exactly known for his people skills.
Not at all. And he ended up pushing away everyone who cared about him because he was so obsessed with power and control.
It's sad when you think about it.
He was so focused on conquering the world that he forgot to connect with the people around him.
It's like that saying, it's lonely at the top.
Yeah, and I think it highlights the importance of building genuine connections with people, of valuing collaboration and mutual respect over individual achievement.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, relationships are what truly matter.
Totally. And you know who else understood that?
Who's that?
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting choice.
Yeah, so he was known for being incredibly organized and methodical.
I can see that, like very structured, very disciplined.
Exactly, and he created these elaborate systems to manage information and delegate effectively.
He sounds like my kind of guy.
Right, and I think it speaks to his humility and his understanding that he couldn't do everything himself.
Yeah, it's about trusting other people and empowering them to do their best work.
Exactly, and I think that's a really important quality for any leader to have.
Absolutely, because you can't build a strong team if you're trying to do everything yourself.
Totally, it's about creating an environment where everyone feels valued and respected.
And where people feel safe to take risks and make mistakes.
Exactly, because that's how we learn and grow.
And you know what else is important?
What's that?
Remembering that leadership is not about being the smartest person in the room.
Right. It's about creating space for others to shine.
Exactly. And it's about being willing to listen and learn from others.
And about giving credit where credit is due.
Absolutely. Because true leadership is about empowering others, not taking all the credit for yourself.
It's about focusing on the steak, not the sizzle, as Holiday says.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. It's about valuing substance over superficiality.
And contribution over recognition.
Exactly. And remembering that achieving a goal is great,
Yeah.
but it's what we do after that truly defines us.
So true. It's not about the destination. It's about the journey.
Exactly. And speaking of learning from others, are we ready to tackle Genghis Khan again?
Oh, man, he keeps coming up.
I know, right? But I think his story is just so fascinating.
Okay, let's do it.
So we talked about how he was this ruthless conqueror,
Right.
but he was also incredibly adaptable.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He and the Mongols, they were constantly studying their enemies. They would adopt their technologies, their tactics.
So they were always learning.
Always, they knew that the key to their success was to be able to adapt to any situation.
That's amazing. It's
Yeah.
like they were constantly evolving.
Exactly. And I think there's a really important lesson there for us today.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the world is changing so rapidly.
Faster than ever.
Exactly. And the people and organizations that are able to adapt and evolve are the ones that are going to thrive.
It's like that Darwin quote. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change.
That's a good one. And it makes me think about the tech world.
Oh, yeah.
Because companies that fail to innovate, they quickly become obsolete.
Like, remember Blockbuster?
Oh, yeah. What happened to that?
They refused to adapt to the changing market, and Netflix came in and ate their lunch.
Wow. So they basically disrupted themselves.
Exactly. And I think that's a cautionary tale for all of us.
Yeah. We can't rest on our laurels. We have to be constantly learning and growing.
And we have to be willing to challenge our assumptions and be open to new ideas.
Oh. Because the moment we think we have it all figured out is the moment we stop growing.
So true. And you know what else is important?
What's that?
Remembering that success is not a linear path.
Oh, yeah. It's messy.
Totally. There are ups and downs, twists and turns.
Exactly. And sometimes the greatest growth comes from our biggest setbacks.
It's like that saying, sometimes you have to fall apart to fall into place.
I love that. And I think it's so relevant to this conversation because ego can make us afraid to fail.
Oh, absolutely.
But failure is just a part of life.
And it's often our greatest teacher.
Totally. And you know what else I was thinking about?
What's that?
Katharine Graham.
Oh, yeah, the Washington Post.
Yeah, her story is just incredible to me.
It really is. She's such a badass.
I know, right?
Yeah.
She took over this massive media empire during such a tumultuous time.
And she faced so many challenges, like her husband's death, the hostile takeover attempt, the strike at the paper.
It's amazing she didn't just crack under pressure.
Right. But she found a way to persevere, and I think it's because she had this incredible sense of purpose.
Yeah, she was fighting for something bigger than herself.
Exactly. And that gave her the strength to keep going, even when things got really tough.
It's a powerful reminder that when we align our actions with a greater purpose, We tap into a source of strength that's greater than ourselves.
And I think that's something that we can all aspire to.
Totally, to find that thing that lights our fire
Hmm.
and makes us want to get out of bed in the morning.
Exactly. And to use our work to make a positive impact on the world.
And you know what else is interesting?
What's that?
When we look at John DeLorean's story,
Oh, yeah, the car guy.
instead of learning from his mistakes, his ego drove him to make even riskier decisions.
Oh, right. He got involved in that drug trafficking scandal.
Yeah, it's like his ego wouldn't allow him to admit defeat, to learn from his mistakes, and to start over.
It's almost like he doubled down on his ego to try to salvage his image.
Exactly, and it ended up backfiring spectacularly.
It's a classic example of how our ego can blind us to the bigger picture and lead us down a path of self-destruction.
Totally, and it makes me think of that quote from Malcolm X.
What's that?
He said, "Every defeat, every heartbreak, every loss contains its own seed, its own lesson on how to improve your performance the next time around."
I love that quote.
Me too, and I think it's so relevant to this idea of ego because it's about how we choose to respond to failure.
Right. Do we let it define us, or do we use it as an opportunity for growth?
Exactly, and I think that's the key difference between someone like DeLorean and someone like Malcolm X.
So true. DeLorean let his ego drive him to make even riskier decisions, while Malcolm X used his time in prison for profound personal transformation.
Yeah, he immersed himself in books, he engaged in deep self-reflection, and he emerged a completely changed man.
It's incredible. He turned what could have been dead time into alive time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful reminder that even in the face of adversity, we always have a choice.
A choice in how we respond.
Exactly. We can choose to let our circumstances define us, to become bitter and resentful, or we can choose to focus on what we can control, our mindset, our attitude, our actions.
And that reminds me of another really powerful story about enduring injustice with grace.
Okay, let's hear it.
Remember we were talking about Orson Welles?
Oh, yeah. Citizen Kane, one of my all-time favorites.
So when that film came out, William Randolph Hearst was convinced it was based on his life.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he was furious. He launched this massive campaign to discredit the film and prevent it from being released.
Wow, talk about an ego trip.
Right. But here's the thing, it totally backfired.
No way.
Oh yeah, his actions actually amplified the film's success.
How so?
Well, all the controversy and negative press just made people more curious to see it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Right. It's like he inadvertently created a huge marketing campaign for the film.
Wow, talk about snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
Exactly. And in the process, he ended up damaging his own reputation.
So his ego backfired spectacularly.
Big time. And I think that's a good reminder that sometimes the best way to disarm our enemies is to simply refuse to engage in their games.
It's like not letting them see you sweat.
Exactly. Because when we get caught up in reacting to every little slight or provocation, we give our power away.
And we end up playing their game instead of ours.
Exactly. And I think that's something that Frederick Douglass understood on a profound level.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
He famously said, "They cannot degrade Frederick Douglass. The soul that is within me, no man can degrade."
Such a powerful statement.
It really is. And I think it speaks to this idea that true self-worth comes from within, not from external validation.
So it's not about what other people think of us, but about how we see ourselves.
Exactly. And when we base our self-worth on external factors, we're giving other people the power to define us.
And that's a dangerous game to play.
It really is, because we're essentially handing over control of our own happiness and well-being.
So what's the alternative?
I think it starts with cultivating a strong sense of self-love and self-acceptance.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because when we truly love and accept ourselves flaws and all user, we're less likely to seek validation from others.
And we're less likely to be thrown off balance by criticism or negativity.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important foundation for managing our ego, because it allows us to approach challenges and setbacks with more grace and resilience.
It's like we're less fragile, less easily bruised by the ups and downs of life.
Exactly. And that frees us up to focus on what truly matters, which is living a life that's aligned with our values and making a positive impact on the world around us.
That's beautifully said. And you know what it makes me think about?
What's that?
This idea of choosing our battles wisely.
Oh, yeah.
Because we could spend our whole lives fighting every little perceived injustice.
Right. And it's exhausting.
It really is. And I think that's where this idea of love comes in.
Okay. I like where you're going with this.
Not romantic love necessarily,
There you
but
go.
like love as a force for good, you know?
Yeah, like a way of being in the world that transcends all that ego-driven stuff.
Exactly. Because when we lead with love, it's like we're choosing compassion over judgment,
Forgiveness over resentment.
understanding over the need to be right.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, you know?
Totally, we're all in this together.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's really easy to forget when we're caught up in our own little bubbles.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's like we get so focused on our own problems, our own goals, our own little dramas.
And we forget that everyone else is going through their own stuff too.
Exactly. And when we can tap into that sense of shared humanity,
It changes everything.
it really does. And I think it makes it a lot easier to let go of those petty, ego-driven squabbles.
Totally. Because it's like, what's the point?
Exactly. Life's too short to be wasting our energy on that kind of stuff.
Amen to that.
And you know what else I was thinking about?
What's that?
We've been talking about all these different ways to manage our ego.
Right. Setting goals, finding purpose,
Yeah.
practicing humility.
Yeah, all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, it's an ongoing process, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not like you just wake up one day and you're like, boom, ego conquered.
Right. It's like that old saying, ego is the enemy, but it's a lifelong battle.
Exactly. And I think that's why Holiday compares it to sweeping the floor.
Oh, yeah, I love that analogy.
You might get it clean today.
But the dust will settle again tomorrow.
Exactly. So it's about cultivating that sense of self-awareness.
Right, like constantly checking in with ourselves.
Yeah. And asking ourselves, am I acting from a place of ego or am I aligned with my values?
Because the ego is sneaky.
Oh, yeah. It's always lurking in the shadows waiting for an opportunity to trip us up.
So true. And I think that's why it's so important to have a strong support system.
Oh, absolutely. People who can call us out on our BS.
Exactly. Because sometimes we need that outside perspective to help us see what we can't see in ourselves.
Totally. It's like that saying, you can't read the label from inside the jar.
Exactly. And you know what else I think is important?
What's that?
Remembering that comparison is the thief of joy.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to others.
Especially in the age of social media.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's like everyone's highlight reel is our constant feed.
And it's so easy to start feeling like we're not good enough.
Totally. Or that we're not doing enough.
Exactly. And that's when the ego starts to spiral.
Yeah, because it's like, well, if I'm not as successful as that person, then I must be a failure.
And that's just not true.
Not at all. Everyone's journey is different.
Exactly. And we all have our own unique gifts and talents to share with the world.
Totally. So I think it's important to celebrate other people's successes
Yes.
without letting it diminish our own accomplishments.
Exactly. Because there's enough room for everyone to shine.
And I think that's a really important message to remember,
It really is.
especially in today's world where it's so easy to get caught up in competition and comparison.
So true.
Yeah.
But when we can shift our focus from competition to collaboration,
Yeah,
that's when the magic happens.
totally, because we're all in this together. Well, this has been an amazing deep dive.
I know, right? I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this book.
Me too. There's so much more to unpack, but I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We definitely have. And I think the main takeaway is that ego is something that we all struggle with,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
but it's not something that we have to let control us.
Exactly. There are things that we can do to manage our ego.
And to live a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
Absolutely. So for anyone listening, if you're ready to start taking control of your ego,
I highly recommend checking out Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday.
it's a game changer for sure.
Totally. And if you're looking for more great insights on how to live a better life,
Don't forget to subscribe to The Deep Dive wherever you get your podcasts.
and be sure to follow us on social media for more updates and behind-the-scenes content.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.